What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another Yugioh Sevens Ranking video. If you guys are new to the channel, this is a segment that I do every 10 episodes of the Yugioh 7 series, where I will be ranking in one video the last 10 episodes of duels that we saw throughout the last 10 episodes, and one video where I go over the last 10 episodes. And I can finally actually say that, as this is the first video where I'm actually doing the last 10 episodes. The first one I did the first 9, but that was because a hiatus occurred, and since we were waiting for the episode 10 to come out, I decided just to start it early and do the first 9 episodes, and then the last one I made it up with 11 episodes. But this is actually going to be the last 10 episodes of the Yugioh 7 series finally, with episodes 21 through 30 are going to be the ones we're going to be ranking today. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let me know your guys' list down below, or if you just want to see your favorite episode and your least favorite episode from the last 10 episodes, please put that down in the comment section below. And if you want to go as far as put your favorite episode so far throughout the entire series and your least favorite episode, you can go ahead and do that as well. I encourage it. So, without further ado, let's not waste any more time, and let's get right into this ranking video. So, starting this list off at number 10 and being my least favorite episode from the last 10 episodes is episode 22. Now, I'll mention I will not be talking about the duels at all in this. I might mention them, but if you want to know what my thoughts are on the duels, the duel rankings should already be out by now, or at least I really hope it was out. I'm massive recording right now. I'm recording this video. I recorded the duel rankings video. I'm going to be recording episode 5 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains dub after this, then 6, 7, 8 of the Vrains dub, chapter 8 of the OCG Structures manga, and then on Thursday or something like that, I don't know when, I'm going to be recording episode 31 summary preview analysis. So I got a lot to do, and I'm very excited to be getting this content out for you guys. But a little plugging aside, well, it's not plugging them, they're not out, but you get the point. This episode was just not really that much interesting. I think the only cool thing that came out of this was kind of learning about the watch. That was a main point that we were learning from this episode, as when we were watching, we saw that the watch was malfunctioning, something was going on. Everything that Rook touched was stopped working. You know, he touched the waitress at the AI restaurant, the AI waitress. It powered off the elevator, it stopped working, and everything was just going bad. In fact, Yuga took the watch, then Rook got captured by Arya, and that's when we got into the duel. I already said my thoughts on the duel. I wasn't really a big fan of the duel, so that duel didn't help as much. What was interesting about it, though, is when Yuga, Gakuto, and Roman tried to use the watch themselves, they couldn't use it. They tried to use their own forms of the devil. You know, you had Yuga Devil, Roman Devil, Gakuto Devil, but it didn't work. The watch did not work one bit when they tried to do it. In fact, Arya was getting scared. He was kind of curling up. He was scared of what was going to happen, but nothing ended up happening. They weren't able to get it up. It confuses Yuga because he thought he figured out what in the world was going on and why he did it, because he noticed that in a flashback, he took off his watch when he dueled, and he doesn't normally use it. Actually, that's why his dual disc doesn't malfunction. That's the reason why he thought he took off his watch. He maybe could have slid it up a little bit when he put on the dual disc, but then that would have stopped it if that was the case. So that's where he had the feeling that maybe it's the watch that was doing it. But that seems not to be the case, because after Rook puts the watch back on, he was able to do it again, because the door was locked after Arya and Rook's duel. He shows them to a door that they can't open. It was locked to go to the provenance, or the heaven, I should say, of Neo's, his provenance, whatever you want to call it. It was heaven. His provenance is what his whole saying was. My mistake. But he is able to touch the door. It malfunctions. He's able to open it, and they were able to go through. And now it points the question: how does this work? If it's the watch, then why does it only work with Rook? But if he does have this power, where is his power coming from? Like, that poses the question that maybe this is some sort of power, whatever it might be. It was interesting to learn about that, but other than that, this episode and the duel itself was not interesting. Honestly, if you watch the duel rankings video, that duel is going to be ranked pretty low on my list. If you guys didn't watch it already, you guys would already know what it's ranked at, but if you haven't, please go and check it out. It was a fun video to make. But with that being said, the duel in the episode wasn't interesting much, and yeah, it was my least favorite episode. It's ranked 10 on my list. Up next at the number 9 spot, we have episode 21. I might get some hate for this one, but I'm going to be honest, this episode was just not interesting. If you watched my maximum arc video, you know that I was not the biggest fans of episodes 16 through 22, I believe it was. Yeah, it was episodes 16 through 22. I was not the big fans of this, and this kind of falls in that category. The duel I had ranked a little bit higher. I think I had that. It was somewhere in the middle. I think it was like 7 or 6 or something like that. I can't remember. You guys watched the video and you probably would remind me. But even though the duel had some interesting moments, I don't know, it's just this episode just didn't really interest me at all. I think really one of the interesting things about it was, at the beginning they were kind of having a conversation after they just got back from getting a penalty from episode 20 when they got the penalty because Mimi lost her duel against Yugioh and she was counted in the system as being a part of Team Yuga. They kind of had that whole conversation where they need to be careful with their penalties because if they keep losing to people that the system counts as Yuga's team, they're going to get 6 penalties out of nowhere, and they're not even purposely trying to do that. So they need to just be more careful with the people that they duel, which was a very interesting scene. And also we meet Advisor M out of nowhere. I don't know why that she was a character. I think she appeared in episode 26 as well, which we know it's Mimi. Like, there was no hiding it. I mean, in episode 20, we did find out that she was number 6. She was a member of Top of Hexagon. So I guess this was a way to hide her identity. But they kind of were. It was funny because Yuga, Gakuto, and Roman were already noticing it, and Rook, obviously being Rook, being oblivious to it. Then they go to that AI restaurant. We meet Sorako, and basically they sit there. They say this ramen is out of this world. Then they get into a duel, and then that was basically it for the episode. Sorako, after the duel, returns to her home world, and then that's basically it for the duel. Like I said before in that, I wasn't really that big of an interest in this duel. I just didn't quite click with me, like I said in that one. And just the dialogue, the only thing that was really interesting was just Advisor M, but that's just because I didn't really expect it. And in the conversation, but I felt like the conversation didn't really mean anything. And the reason I say that is because when you look a little bit ahead, the only losses that they have throughout the series for the rest of the time was Yugo losing to the main antagonist, and then they get into a situation again where they had to get 3 penalties because of the whole Otis thing that ended up happening. So these characters like Metsuboro, Bakuro, Khan, they didn't have to worry about anything because they made it seem like that they were going to be fine because the duel that Metsuboro had, he still won his duel. I think I would have liked this episode a little bit more if, honestly, he lost his duel. I know the reason why they didn't do it, but I think it would have been better if he lost a duel and maybe got another loss, and then you had Otis being that 4th one, instead of having Otis just take all the things, which I'll kind of talk about that gripe when I get to that episode, but I don't know, this episode was just not really that much interesting. I said this with 16 through 22, that these ones aren't going to be interesting episodes for me. In fact, they are my 2 least favorite episodes from the last 10 episodes. And yeah, that was my thoughts on those episodes. It's ranked 9 on my list. Sorry for you guys that like the duel. I just wasn't the biggest interest in them. Like, I think like the 4 duels that I had on there, like at the bottom, I just wasn't interested in them. Sorry, can't say much about it. Up next, we have episode 24, which was the Roman, Rook, and Gakuto one when they faced Otis. That was the episode that I'm going to be referring to. This one was a very interesting episode. As this episode, it kind of talked about how Neil was able to change the game by including maximum summon. We learned at the very beginning of this episode that, or he just informs Yuga in the group, because we saw that in episode 23, that he hacked into the system and included maximum summoning into this. He then teleports them out, and then they get their second penalty for the entire series so far. The only other one being was the mentioned earlier of Mimi. And then Yuga goes into this entire state where he wasn't even talking to anyone. Like or at least to his friends, Rook, Roman, and Gakuto, he was not talking about them at all. Like when Rook tries to call him, he wouldn't answer him. In fact, he goes to Roa's apartment out of nowhere. I don't know why he went there, but he wanted to go and talk to Roa. They kind of had a moment where they were kind of talking to each other. I like the scene, but I wish it wasn't just cut out of nowhere. Because if you guys remember from that episode, Roa grabs Yuga by the collar and gets mad at him, but then the conversation just ends. I thought that was very weird, and it was not even touched up going in the episodes forward. Like, a couple episodes, we kind of learned the purpose from this episode, but, and I'm going to kind of talk about that in just a second, of why that's ranked lower, if I'm mentioning something else, and I'll kind of get into that. But that whole scene where he grabs him by the collar and that conversation they had, that was never shown, which I was a little bit disappointed of. I don't know why they didn't show the scene, but I guess there's nothing we can really do about it unless they, for some reason, say something later on, but I really doubt it. But then you had the whole thing where they were, Rook, Roman, and Gakuto were trying to figure out a way of how are they going to beat Neil with him having the power of maximum summoning. How in the world are they going to beat him? So they decided to go and find Otis. They think that's the best option that they will have in terms of finding the answer to this. So they go back to where it all started, actually, and then Otis is there, and they get challenged to a duel where no matter, and it's even like I said before in the duel ranking video, where he says no matter which way you do it, if you decide to duel me, you guys are getting 3 penalties, and that's going to be it. So what is your choice? But they decided to do it, which I do respect them for doing it. Like I said in that duel rankings video, that was just a cop-out to give them 5 penalties. It was, because at where they were at the series, they got 2 penalties, and you know what's funny? They get 4 penalties in just this one episode alone. You got that from the very beginning of this episode, and then at the final end of this episode, boom, you get 3 more penalties. That's 4 penalties that you didn't have before. Really? I don't know why they had to do that, but I understand why they did it, because they wanted to get it to 5 penalties before we got into the second Yuga Neil duel, but it didn't really need to be like that. You could have had some of Neil's team do that, and that's why I was a little bit disappointed with this arc, because Neil's team didn't do anything throughout this arc, and they just threw all the penalties to Otis. Like, Otis got him 3 penalties, when you could have had, like, Metsuboro lose a duel, or a very interesting thing you can do, have Mimi and Yoshio draw during that duel, and I'm just thinking of something, I don't know. And then, because they drew and they basically both lost all their life points, maybe that gives them 2 penalties. I don't know, I think that would have been cool, but that's not the way they ended up doing it. A little bit disappointing, but again, that's nothing much you can do about it. Already talked about the duel. And then we get a scene at the end where they kind of were talking to Yuga. Yuga kind of feels bad for what ends up happening. And then that whole conversation, it ends. We don't see the whole conversation, but we see that throughout the other episodes. So I think what just hurts us is we don't get that conversation that we get in episode 25, which I will talk about a little bit later, because I absolutely loved that scene that ended up happening in 25, and if it was shown in 23, I would have been fine with it. But since that more built up to that episode, I think that episode benefited it from it more than episode 24. So that's why I feel like this one is a little bit lower, because it just more helped a future episode that's going to be on this list. So yeah, it comfortably sits at number 8 on this list for me for this ranking video. Up next, we actually got the last episode that we got in the series, and that was episode 30. This might be an interesting spot, especially if you watch my duel ranking video. That duel was actually pretty high on the list. It was actually in the top 3 of that list. So, how in the world did it get to my fourth least favorite episode? Well, honestly, the duel really carried that for this episode, and then one other thing carried it for this episode was at the very beginning of this episode, where and it was a little bit of a small thing, they didn't explore it that much, but I thought it was very interesting. At the very beginning of this episode, apparently Gakuto gets this postcard of Ranz and Renosuke saying that they are away on vacation with their parents, and that was the reason why they didn't end up at the training camp. Now, we obviously know that's not the case, because if you watched episode 29, we know that Ranz and Renosuke was forced to have to go work at the sixth elementary excavation club because they lost a duel with Galliant. So Galliant sent them a fake postcard just to basically set up an intimidation, because of the fact that when Gakuto, and I say this, when Gakuto finds out that this is a lie and that Ranz and Renosuke have to work for Galliant, this is going to make him angry, and he's going to go after Galliant. So I felt like this was another case where it's building up for a future episode, which I do like, but it doesn't help the episode itself. It helps a future episode. So that's why this goes a little bit lower. It's a pretty interesting scene, but it doesn't really impact it that much. And then it's just the duel that really carried this episode, in my opinion, with the fact that in this episode, we do learn about Rook's sister. In fact, we actually that was another thing too. We get to learn in this episode that Tiger, in a flashback, beats Rook, which is very interesting to find out, because throughout the entire series, Rook has been undefeated. There has not been a moment that we knew that Rook lost a duel. He was undefeated this entire series. So to then find out that Tiger, his big sister, which was another cool thing to learn that he actually had a sister in this episode. Also, the scene where, before the duel even occurred, she was going to literally fight Yuga. That's what I thought was absolutely funny with this episode, and that's why it's a little bit higher than episode 24 on this list. But the fact that she was literally going to fight him, like she had nunchucks and all this fighting equipment, and she was ready to go on him, but he's like, you know what? How about we duel? Let's do it my way. How about we just do a rush duel? Let's not actually get through these weapons and stuff like that. And she obliges, and she goes to duel Yuga. And I already gave my thoughts. I loved that duel. The fact that she was about to win this duel really made this episode stand out. In fact, that's what made that duel so high on the list. But everything else just wasn't really interesting. The whole finding out that this tournament was a wind... This was like a... It was a trumpet duet, excuse me. And that kind of was a little bit disappointing. Now, I'm going to say this. For people that started saying in the comment section below about spoilers for episode 31, I'm going to say this. I already read it. I know what's going on with it. I'm just not going to talk about it. I just want to let you guys know. But so, knowing that fact that we know, it makes it kind of a little bit better. It makes the whole thing confusing from this episode and then episode 31. So I think I needed to kind of mention that, because I think that was just a little bit weird with that, because I was already disappointed, and then the news from 31 came out. I'm not going to say anything about it for people that don't want spoilers, but this just made this whole thing like, is there really a purpose for this? Like, why did they just waste their time doing this? And then because we find out that there's a chance that they just wasted their time learning the instruments. And I felt like that was really disappointing. I don't know why in the world they did that, and that's what actually dropped it so low. Before I read the summary, this was at number 5, I believe it was, and now it's dropped at number... No, I think it was... No, it was at number 5, I remember it. But now it's actually number 6 on my list, so... Yeah, that's what something can change to you. It didn't lower that much. In fact, I might have thought it might be 4, actually. That's besides the point. But overall, the episode, it was alright. I mean, I was more invested with the duel. The duel really carried it, and that's why it was so high on my list originally. But overall, I just thought this was an okay episode, and this duel was ranked 6th on my list. Now we're going to be going into number 6. I actually meant to say number 7 on that. That was my bad. But coming at number 6, we have episode 27. Now, this was the episode where we had that whole Rook versus Rook duel. I just gotta say, this episode was just weird. This episode was just completely weird, especially when you get into the duel when Rook literally transports to this who knows where world, God knows who where world, whatever this was. I'm mixing up my words there for a second, but that was a very weird scene to say the least. But what I liked about this episode and why it's so high for me and why it beat out some of the other ones was to show what growth it gave to Rook. During that whole duel phase that he was having where he was dueling himself, he bumps into the table and he drops down on his knees and he starts crying out of nowhere. We never see Rook cry once in this entire series. But after the whole thing that happened throughout this episode where he decides to make this rush duel club to where he wants people to come in and basically rush duel. And the fact that his friends didn't even join and people were not getting the point of this whole club, because when he went to try to sign in the people that literally played baseball, basketball, that were already in these clubs, soccer included as well, and finding out that Rook is also good at sports. I mean, this man can do any type of sport, which I kind of thank his sister for that, because apparently they kind of competed over that. So he kind of trained himself to try to beat her, but that wasn't the case. She always beat him at that stuff as well, and even beat him at dueling. So yeah, it was interesting to learn about that, but that's not the point of this episode. We didn't even know that. But he was trying to recruit these people, and no one was joining. They thought, like, oh, dueling is just not a team sport. It's fun to do stuff with your friends and all that stuff. Like, being able to be a team with your friends, like, that's the reason why they do these clubs. But Rook kind of goes off and is like, you know, he even makes a statement actually that his deck is his team and that's all he needs. He was kind of explaining the whole thing of rush dueling and how it's supposed to be a fun thing that you can do with your friends. Like, even though you aren't normally in the same team, which, I mean, you just do a tag duel. But you still have fun with your friends when you do rush duels, as you can just compete with each other and just make little fun tournaments and stuff like that, and just have a whole bunch of fun with this. And I think this kind of shows, like, no one just gets the point of dueling except his friends, Rook, Roman, and Gakto, which we're watching off on the side. And seeing him break down like that for everything that ended up happening and what dueling kind of means to him, I really enjoyed watching that a lot, and kind of like what he was kind of going through after all of the rejections towards this whole Rush Duel Club was just, it was fascinating to watch, and I absolutely loved that. Like I said before, the duel was weird. The fact that they actually got teleported to this world, which we do know when Yugioh goes and opens the door, you actually see a flashing light come out, and he's just standing there after the whole duel when he dueled his clone, basically. They come in, they see he has Miragias in his hand, they start questioning about it, and then they actually decided, you know what? We want to join this club. And just to see that at the end of the episode, it really made this episode just like a humble episode. I really did enjoy that little scene, and I just loved how Roman just like, yeah, I'll make sure I take some time out of my other clubs to actually go and help. Then they actually have a little mini tournament with each other where Yugioh faced Rook and Roman faced Gagato, which I should probably mention, I didn't include that in the duel rankings video either. I didn't think, since we didn't see the duels either, it was the same situation as the top of Hexagon member duel and the Tiger and Rook duel. I just wanted to mention that because I forgot to mention that during that duel ranking video. But with all that said and done, this episode was ranked actually number 6 on my list. And yeah, let's get into the top 5 portion of this video. And kicking off this list, we have episode 29. Might be a surprise of how high this episode was, but this was another kind of a setup episode for future episodes, but honestly, I like this one a little bit more than the other ones, as I feel like you can still take it from the moment that it was, because this episode just showed how rootless this Galliant character can be throughout the series, as this was his episode to shine and show how much of a threat that he was going to be during this episode. The beginning of this episode, we find out that Rook, Robin, and Gakuto and Yuga, excuse me, were all trapped at that island that they were staying at that little training camp. There was basically a big old hole around them, so they could not escape. And they tried to send Kaizo out to try to get Sebastian to help them. They end up having an off-screen fight, which I wish we did see that, but I understand why they didn't do that. And then we kind of focus on Ron's and Galliant throughout this episode. What was very interesting about this was kind of learning Ron's case with Yuga, as she is madly in love with Yuga. Like, she was not even hiding it very well. In fact, she goes to the stalkerish points to where she literally writes everything about Yuga and what he's doing. Like, it was weird to watch, but I was kind of intrigued, to be honest. But it was a little bit weird in that scene. They were just running through. They were literally Naruto running through the forest. They were trying to get to the training camp. Which, gosh, I don't understand these two characters a single bit. The fact that they were Naruto running through the thing, and they were running like ninjas as well, because they were running pretty fast. But they end up stopping because they see Galliant them working. They're apparently digging up something. I didn't really mention that in my episode review, I realized, but they were digging up something down there, and Ron ends up falling in that hole, and that's where the whole duel scenario went to, where Galliant basically challenged them to a duel, and if they lost, they were going to have to work at the 6th Elementary Club, and that's where the whole duel starts. She obliges after they decline. He mentions something about Yuga, and she's like, yeah, I'm going to duel this guy. And begins the duel. I mentioned that duel wasn't very interesting to me, but after that, when you see them, like, in kind of like, I don't know, it was like fear to say it was, but like they kind of like hold their hands as they were about to get taken away to the excavation club. We see a scene earlier after that when you see Yuga in the group just basically dying because they hadn't eaten any food in a while. Galliant's group ends up coming, they end up feeding them, and then the whole interaction with Gakuto just made me excited for these two to face off with each other, as Gakuto asked, hey, did you see these two people in the forest? They were supposed to be coming down to the training camp. It was one boy and one girl. And he responds, no, sir, I haven't. And then you just see this smug smirk on his face, and it just made me so excited because these two are going to go after each other some point in this series, and I am so excited. Again, I know this is a build-up for that episode, but I still think it was more than enough than the other ones. Not saying that those other episodes like helped them out, but setting it up is still going to be good. But I just don't think those other ones that I mentioned earlier did enough for their episodes. This one just helped me like this episode more because I like when duels are getting ready to happen. And the setup for this I just really did like, and that's why this duel is ranked so high on my list at number 5. Not that the other ones weren't good, I just think that out of the setups that we've had so far in this ranking video, it was ranked higher than those ones, and that's why it's number 5 on my list. I'm going to say this, though. Ranking these last 4 episodes was hard. It really was hard to rank these last 4 ones. I, changed it up so many times going into this, so let's not waste any time. And number 4 is episode 26, which was the episode to conclude the Maximum arc. What I really did like about this episode was this was continuing from the duel from the last episode, episode 25, and kind of talking my thoughts, and I'm going to be talking about where the turn was at during this episode, and this was during Yuga's turn after he had Maximum summoned his monster, and just that part of the duel I did like. seeing the maximum monsters face off against each other to the point where they actually end up splitting up. In this one, I got to talk about the duel because this one was mainly the duel. This was what this entire episode was. But seeing like the monsters break apart, seeing Neil activate parallel shift to where Yuga has to return his maximum monsters back to his deck to draw new cards because of its effect, and now he has to try to figure out a way to beat YGG Drago without his use of his own maximum monsters. And he tries his best. He's able to get Seven's Road Magician to get higher attack points, but he was able to activate a trap to not only lower the damage, but then regain his life points to 4,000. Then a very interesting scene that is the main scene that really happens through this, that is in the duel, where 77.7% of the people in the city were rooting for rush duels. They were on Yuga's side. And remember, if you're on Yuga's side, you get a penalty. So think about this. If Yuga loses this duel, 77.7% of people, which they just love their 6 and 7 references. Like, this is a clear 777 reference, basically representing like a jackpot in a way. Because if you guys don't know, like, gambling, 777 is basically that is a jackpot. So just to see that little 7 reference, it's kind of a classic one. But think about that again. 77.7% of people, if Yuga loses this duel, that's the percent of people that will lose their accounts. That is wild to me. So this puts more pressure onto him than anything. And then you have Yuga go through this insane anime bullcrap scenario where he just kept drawing and drawing cards till he gets his maximum cards back. Then has to send them back to his deck because Neil activates Paradigm Shift again to where he has to send them back and draw new cards. Then he's able to activate his Create Pot, triple Create Pot spell card to where he can draw 2 more cards, gets the maximum monsters again, and is able to go in his maximum summon. Everyone does the summoning chant with them to, like, Metsuboru's group, Bakuro's group, Khan's group, his 2 friends, I can't remember their names, I don't really care, Roa, Gakuto, Roman, and Yuga was doing as well. All of them just saying the summoning chant as they summon the monster, and then you have him activating the effects. Then you have Yuga attacking his dragon and just destroying the building. Like, that was the insane thing too, and I didn't even mention his duel rankings. He literally slashes through the Gohan building. Like, there was just like a big old crack in it. I don't know if that actually dealt damage to it, but holy crap. Like, he just sliced through the entire building. And then what also made me like this episode as well was just the last shot that we got in this episode. That the fact that we got introduced to the new villainous group with Asana, Galliant, and Chevalier, and that's the way I'm going to say it. We get introduced to them. They're black shadowy creatures. We don't know at this point. These mysterious characters, it's like we're going to utterly and destroy rush duels before the episode ends. Also, something that I didn't mention as well, they didn't play the opening at the very beginning of this episode. I love when animes do that. When they don't play the opening at all, and they just go straight through the episodes. Well, there was a break, and then they went through the episodes. But the fact that they did that, and then when he was doing his turn, that's when you get the rush, and then you have the opening playing when he was doing his final move. And I really did like that. A little bit thing that made this a little bit lower was I was a little bit disappointed to find out that Neil is not going to be dueling for the rest of the series, as before the duel starts, he gave himself 5 penalties. And because he lost his duel, and since he's a part of his own team, he's part of Team Neil, he gets 6 penalties. Oh my gosh, why did they do that? I don't understand why they had to do that. It makes me really upset that they did that. But there's nothing that we can really do about that. And Neil's just done for the series, it looks like. We haven't seen him since episode 20, I think it was 28 was the last time that we saw him. I could be wrong about that. Or no, it was 28. That was my mistake. But that's kind of disappointing that he wasn't going to be doing for the rest of the series, and that's what actually put it at number 4, was kind of remembering that Neil's, even though he might be a part of the series still, the fact that he's just not going to be dueling. I really been enjoying his duels, and now that we're not going to be seeing him for the rest of the series, I was a little bit disappointed, to say the least. And yeah, this duel is ranked number 4, but I still enjoyed this episode. I love this episode. And yeah, let's get into the top 3 portion of this video. Now to the top 3 portion of this list, and starting it off is going to be episode 23. I loved this episode, and these top four again were very difficult to do. I absolutely love these episodes. These episodes were in a range of like 8 to 9 out of 10 in my opinion. And I just love this episode. This episode not only introduced us to maximum summoning, which was phenomenal to see. I mentioned that during that duel. In fact, that first Neil duel was pretty high on my list as well. And it was just a great episode. The beginning of this episode, most of this episode was learning about Neil's provenance and what in the world that meant. And I don't get me wrong, I really did enjoy that episode, like that portion of the episode where they were going through the heaven after they reached it after being Arya, and they were exploring like all the different shops and stuff like that, and kind of learning about provenance and what that means. And learning about that again was very, very interesting to see of what this means. Basically, provenance in his mind meaning like you create your own things. Like nothing has to be restrictive. It should be whatever you believe is great, what is perfect. Like you remember like the shirt that was just like long and the other one was like short, and Roman thought that it was like, okay, this is not style at all, but it's like, but that's our provenance. And when Yuga went to open like that fortune, he's like, but there's nothing written on this fortune. That was provenance. And just seeing all that was just really cool to watch. And then we saw the top of Hexagon members go after Neil in this episode for some reason, because they think he's betraying Goha. They end up dueling him. And the thing that made this at number 3 was the fact that we learned in this episode that top of Hexagon is going to be irrelevant for the series. You know, we've been kind of getting hyped with these characters because we think this is going to be the next main like villains of the series, like kind of like that Soul Technologies arc that we kind of never got in Vrains, or I shouldn't say kind of, we never got in Vrains. And the fact that these members are just not going to do anything. I mean, we find later on in the episodes, but it doesn't affect this, that they get demoted. Every single member gets devoted, which is very, very interesting to learn throughout that episode. But again, we're not really focusing on that. But they kind of learned how their importance just kind of dropped out of nowhere. It just really was hard to watch. But that makes it up with the whole maximum summoning, the duel, Yuga getting beat so bad. And even when Yuga loses a duel, he's on his knees, you just see his eyes are like shading, and you just like almost looked up in like fear. And he's like, what in the world was that? Before ending off the episode with him saying maximum summon, or maximum Shokan is what he actually said. Watching that scene was just incredible, and I really did love that. But kind of learning that top of Hexagon was not going to be very important, this kind of hurt a little bit in my eyes, and that kind of hurt it for this list. And also, learning about the provenance was cool, but I think the other episodes, these next 2 episodes I'll talk about, just did a little bit more than what the provenance would be, or what the provenance was. So yeah, overall I did enjoy this episode, but it didn't do enough to be at the number 1 spot in my opinion. And yeah, it's going to be sitting comfortably at number 3 at this list. I don't know what I meant by third. It's 3rd on my list is what I should have said. My mistake there. Top 2, guys. It is the top 2. So let's get into it. At number 2 is episode 28. Let me just say, this was a great episode. I really did enjoy this episode a lot. This learned a lot of stuff during this episode. We had that scene when Mr. Goha collapsing, apparently, to the point where Mimi ends up screaming. We kind of see that whole Asana scene, which was very weird. We had the duel, and then you had my boy Nick Yagi cooking that big old piece of meat. I mean, I mean, dude, I want this guy to cook for me. He is a master chef to cook a meat that bad or big, I should say. Oh, I wanted that meat from that episode. But all jokes aside, let's just go over everything. The whole Goha scene was very interesting. They'll just learn about that, and that just poses this question of what in the world just happened. What just whole happened in that scene? It posed a lot of questions from that scene. In fact, that was also the episode where everyone got demoted. Even Mimi got demoted. All 6 members got demoted from their spots. Mimi goes and a man reasoning for it, and you see Mr. Goha collapse on the floor, assumingly. And that's where you had the whole scene, which was very, very interesting, but we didn't see much of it. But that was a very weird scene, and I don't know what happened. Hopefully, we do learn in one of these episodes what in the world happened. I bet we will, because they're not going to just not talk about what in the world just happened or why Mr. Goha just collapsed on the floor. So, hope we get a little explanation on that. Then we get to that. Well, before that, we had the whole like ruck for the train cap. We find out that there's going to be a rush duel tournament, even though we learned later on it was a trumpet duel, but that's not the point. They were doing the training regimen, and this one actually is what made it at number 2. Was, even though I love the Asana scene, which I'll talk about that real quick, that whole Asana scene was... I don't know what to say about that scene. I mean, that scene, it was a cool scene, but like, what in the world was going on? Like, she was like really buddy-buddy with Yuga, which we learn at the end of this episode. Like, she's still going after Yuga. But that whole scene where she was just like all like on Yuga, like she almost like looked like she was in love with Yuga in a way. Like she liked Yuga just the way she was acting, like she was infatuated with Yuga, and that was a very weird scene. That's not something that you normally see, but that last shot where it was like the red moon, the blood moon, and she says like, you know, we're going to meet again and we're gonna go after you. Really loved both of those scenes. It was weird with the whole romantic kind of thing that was with it, but I think that last part really did make it up, and not just make it like, okay, that's a little bit eyebrow raising. Why in the world are you doing this? But maybe that's also because she's trying to get close to Yuga, which I really do like. The duel, I already mentioned a duel. It was another duel that was pretty high on my list, and it was high on my list, I would say, and here was the thing that made it number 2. I remember watching through the episodes, and when they were doing the whole training regimen, when Rook was being a captain, which out of all the people to have Rook as the captain, you shouldn't have stepped up, Gakuto. You shouldn't have stepped up. That would have been a perfect moment for you, buddy. But I understand why. He's technically the leader of that club, but still. They make a statement where Roman isn't like doing as hard of the training as Yuga and Gakuto, was because she wasn't in that mode, or she wasn't in that state of intensity to where she should be doing that much, and once she gets into that, she'll be able to do that much. So he was letting her take breaks to kind of build her up to that, to where she can go into that. And the fact that they were emphasizing the fact that, you know, she is going to be at her highest strength when she's in that mode royally made me angry. It really made me upset with this, because I don't know why you have to do that. I don't know why she has to be in this mode to do like most of the stuff that they do, like of equal or even higher planes. I don't think she needs to have that. I feel like she can be capable without doing that. I just didn't really like that scene. Maybe I just didn't like that personally, but I just thought it wasn't a really good scene. I really did not like that, and I kind of hurt that duel to some degree. But even though that was the case, it wasn't enough to not make me like this episode. I still really did enjoy this episode. Watching that go seeing the whole, both scenes with Asana, the duel I thought was good, even though I didn't like the mode that ended up happening during this. I have not liked that mode since the very beginning. and the fact that she snapped out of it and lost after that, was not a big fan of that. But everything that happened, since a lot of stuff happened in this episode, that's what boosts this episode so high, because of all the great stuff that happened. Even though I might had a little bit more complaints to the other ones, and that might be questioning like, how is this one higher if I was not complaining as much about the other two? That's just because so much happened. If that episode had it to where Roman didn't snap out of the mode and she lost in that mode for me, and they didn't do that scene with Rook kind of letting her take it easy, this would have been easily at number one for me. It wouldn't be even questionable. It just wouldn't be like almost a perfect episode. This basically would be a perfect episode. And just for those things that held this episode back, even though I still very much enjoyed this episode, it just puts it at number two. I just couldn't look past those points of the episode, and that's why it's ranked number two on my list. But you know what? Number two is not that bad at all, to be honest. And topping this list up at number one is episode 25. I actually really enjoyed this episode. One of the biggest things that made this episode so high on my list was the scene when we finally got to see the scene on episode 24, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But this duel was a great throwback episode. This just was a nostalgia trip of an episode. We saw Blue Eyes White Dragon, we saw Red Eyes, we saw Dark Magician, the Swordsman of Landstar, Vorsh Raider, Harpy Ladies. We saw all of these legendary monsters, and it was just incredible to see. I really did enjoy seeing that, even though like they weren't the actual cards we see. Just to see like these just statues of these legendary monsters was just cool. I mean, I love Easter eggs. Easter eggs are so cool to watch in the series, and I really did enjoy seeing that scene. But when they got to the top, then they were kind of like looking over the original duel disc. Neil comes out of nowhere, and Yugioh thought Rook thought it was a part of the thing, which was absolutely funny. And that's where we get the whole duel. Yugioh says, I'm ready to duel you. He puts on his duel disc. Neil notices that he has 5 penalties. Like, are you sure you want to duel me? You have 5 penalties. You lose this duel, it's it. You're done. You can no longer duel anymore. Your account will be terminated. And Yugioh was more than ready to be a part of this episode, or be a part of the duel. He was ready to duel. And in this very beginning, he was ready for this, because he was able to take an attack from YGG Drago, the maximum monster, which he just summoned on his first turn, by the way, which, I mean, I wasn't surprised that he summoned it. Oh, I was kind of surprised that he summoned on the first turn, but the fact that Yugioh was able not only just to survive the attack overall, but the fact that he took no damage whatsoever showed that he was not messing around when he came to this duel. He was ready for when YGG Drago came into the field. And when he got ready for his turn, and we saw that those cards that looked like Rook, Ramen, and Gakuto, and we saw them being drawn, and they became the maximum cards. Even though I didn't like the fact that they technically cheated to do it, it was still a good scene no matter what. But what made it so much better was that scene that we got. We find out that during that whole sequence, Rook, Roman, and Gakuto decided that they would be willing to give up their duel accounts so that Yugioh can create maximum cards, because in order to create the cards, you have to have a plain ID card. And since their ID cards basically are plain cards with just their dual IDs, they thought, you know what, this is going to work. If we give you our dual accounts, you would be able to transfer these into maximum cards so that you can beat Neil. And Yugioh immediately tried to shut it down. He was like, no, we're not doing that. This would be risking you guys' accounts. There is a good chance that you can never get your accounts back if we lose this duel. And I do not want to risk that. He didn't want to risk that, basically. And they laughed at him for it. They literally laughed at him. He's like, wow, we wouldn't expect that response from you, because when it comes to inventions and it comes to creating stuff, this is the stuff that you like. But that's where you show that he is humane. That if it goes to the point to where you are literally risking your friend's dream. Because think about from Rook's perspective, he is wanting to become the Duel King. Remember this. He is willing to risk his account, and he knows that. He knows that there's a good chance that he cannot become the Duel King. They make a joke where he's like, oh, well, if I can't just become the Duel King by dueling, you could just give me the title. Like, you can just win the duel and just give me the title. Like, they just made a joke after that, and I loved it. I really did love it, because he was kind of thinking about it. Even though he doesn't want that to happen, he's willing to do it for Yuga to beat Neil. And after a little bit of while of like thinking about it, he decided to go ahead and go with it. And you saw that he didn't really want to do this, because that's just how much of a caring person Yuga is. I've been really enjoying Yuga. At first, I was like, okay, he seems like an interesting protagonist, but I don't know. I wasn't really with him at the beginning. I liked like the side. I was liking Rook a little bit more. I liked Gakuto a little bit more. I think at the time I was actually liking Roman at the same time. Like, he was like my least favorite character, but after this episode before 27, he became my favorite character in this show so far. I really enjoyed that scene a lot, and that's a big reason why that boost. And then seeing his maximum summon for the first time, you had Rook, Roman, and Gakuto joining in there as well, because these maximum cards are a part of them as well, because their dual accounts are these cards. So the fact of how much they have a bond with the maximum monster that he summons, Overroad, which was a really cool summon, by the way. I really did enjoy it. It got me a lot of Power Ranger vibes with the Megazords, and I really did like that. It kind of went back like a trip for me into the past when I used to watch Power Rangers as a kid, so I thought that was a really cool thing as well. And yeah, this whole episode was just fantastic to watch. I really did enjoy this episode a lot, and that's why I made the #1 spot. I don't even think there really was a complaint that I had with this episode at all. There really wasn't a complaint. And just seeing like YGG Drago actually breaking the building, like they had to go to the roof because of how big this monster was. And it like destroyed the Goha building. Like I mentioned in episode 26, Overroad slashes through the building. So this solid vision is actually damaging the real world, which it was very fascinating to see that as well. And then to see Overroad and Drago like squaring off against each other, like even though YGG Drago was still bigger than Overroad, just seeing these two behemoth monsters facing each other square up was really cool to see, and I really did like that final shot that we got before the end of the episode. So yeah, it was just a great episode overall, and it was my favorite episode from the last 10 episodes of the show. And with that, guys, that is going to be it for this episode. Another pretty long review, and yeah, I didn't really have much of an outro there. But that's going to be it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. This is a little bit longer video than I normally do. I just love talking about these episodes. I think these were some of the highest episodes, definitely, of the show so far from the last ones that I talked about. Like, the fact that I've been really in depth with talking about these shows, or like these episodes, I've been enjoying these last couple of episodes. I've really been enjoying the show again. Like, after that last arc, I was really at a point where I was like, I was not getting interested in the show, but the show has somehow got me back in interest, and I've been really enjoying the show, even though it's still not on the highest, I will say. I've been enjoying the series. This series has been getting back up, and I can't wait for the next 10 episodes of the series and see if it can get me this hyped. Probably won't be another hour-long video, I hope so, but we'll just have to wait and see, shall we? But that's going to be it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your guys' rankings, or at least your favorite episode and your least favorite episode down below, as well as if you want to, your favorite episode from all of them and your least favorite episode from all of them. Let me know all your guys' thoughts on that down below. And yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, guys, take care. Have yourselves a great rest of your day.